What happens when one of country music's biggest stars finds herself in the middle of a late-night interview that goes completely off the rails? Carrie Underwood, known for her poise and professionalism, walked off the set of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert after an exchange that left the audience in stunned silence. This wasn't a planned bit. This wasn't scripted drama. This was real tension that escalated so fast that even the production crew didn't know what to do. Before we get into exactly what was said that made Carrie stand up and leave, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story has layers you won't believe. The evening started like any other taping. Carrie Underwood was scheduled to appear on The Late Show to promote her latest album and talk about her upcoming tours. She walked out to thunderous applause, looking radiant in a sleek black dress, waving to the crowd with that signature smile that has won over millions of fans worldwide. Stephen Colbert greeted her warmly. They exchanged pleasantries, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. The audience was energized, the cameras were rolling, and it looked like it was going to be another successful late-night appearance. Stephen started with the usual softball questions. He asked about her new music, about life on the road, about balancing her career with family. Carrie answered each question with grace and humor, sharing anecdotes that had the audience laughing and engaged. She talked about her sons, about the creative process behind her latest album, and about what it meant to still be making music after all these years in the industry. Stephen seemed genuinely interested, nodding along, making jokes at the right moments, and the chemistry between them appeared solid. But then something shifted. Stephen leaned back in his chair, and you could see it in his face. He was about to pivot to something different. The tone of his voice changed slightly, becoming a bit more pointed, a bit more probing. He said, "Carrie, you've been in the public eye for almost 2 decades now, and you've managed to stay relatively private about your personal beliefs and political views, which in today's climate is almost impossible. But there's been a lot of speculation lately about where you stand on certain issues. Do you think artists have a responsibility to speak out, or do you think it's better to keep that part of yourself separate from your art?" The audience went quiet. It was one of those questions that sounds innocent enough on the surface, but carries a weight that everyone in the room could feel. Carrie's smile faded just a touch. She took a moment before responding, and when she did, her voice was measured and careful. She said, "I think every artist has to make that decision for themselves, Stephen. For me, my music has always been about connecting with people through shared experiences, emotions, and stories. I don't think I need to tell people how to think or what to believe. I trust my fans to be intelligent enough to form their own opinions." Stephen nodded, but he wasn't done. He pressed further. "Sure, but don't you think there are moments in history, moments like the ones we're living through now, where silence can be interpreted as complicity, where staying neutral isn't really neutral at all?" You could feel the tension rising. Carrie shifted in her seat, and her expression hardened just slightly. She replied, "I don't think it's fair to say that someone is complicit just because they choose not to broadcast every single opinion they have. I've used my platform for causes I care deeply about. I've supported charities. I've advocated for things that matter to me. But I also believe that not every conversation needs to happen in front of a camera." Stephen leaned forward, his tone becoming more challenging. "But Carrie, isn't that a luxury that not everyone has? The luxury to stay quiet when things get uncomfortable. A lot of your fans, especially younger fans, look up to you. They want to know where you stand. Don't you think you owe them that?" And that's when you could see Carrie's jaw tighten. The friendly warmth that had characterized the first part of the interview was gone, replaced by something much colder. She said, "I don't owe anyone an explanation for how I choose to live my life or use my voice. I've been doing this long enough to know that no matter what you say, someone is going to be upset. Someone is going to twist your words. Someone is going to decide they know who you are based on one comment in one interview. So forgive me if I'm careful about what I share and when I share it." The audience was completely silent now. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Stephen, to his credit, didn't back down. He said, "I hear what you're saying, but isn't that exactly the problem? That we've gotten to a place where people are more afraid of being misunderstood than they are committed to standing up for what's right." Carrie's eyes flashed. She said, "Standing up for what's right, according to who? Stephen, according to you, according to whatever the trending topic is this week. I've spent my entire career trying to be authentic. trying to stay true to myself. And part of that means not performing my beliefs for an audience just because it's expected. I respect people who are vocal about their politics. I genuinely do. But that doesn't mean everyone has to operate the same way. Stephen wasn't letting it go. He said, "Okay, but let's get specific for a second. There are issues right now that aren't really political. They're moral. Human rights, equality, basic decency. Are those things you feel comfortable talking about? Or are those also off limits?" Carrie sat back and crossed her arms. She said, "You're trying to back me into a corner, and I don't appreciate it. You invited me here to talk about my music, about my tour, and instead you're trying to turn this into some kind of interrogation. If you want to have a real conversation about complex issues, that's one thing. But what you're doing right now feels like a setup, like you're trying to get me to say something you can use as a headline." Stephen raised his eyebrows. He said, "I'm just asking questions, Carrie. Questions that I think a lot of people want answers to. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's worth examining." And that was the moment everything changed. Carrie uncrossed her arms, placed both hands on the armrests of her chair, and said, "You know what, Stephen? I came here in good faith. I came here to have a conversation, to connect with people, to share my work. But this isn't a conversation. This is you trying to prove a point at my expense. And I'm not going to sit here and let you do that." The audience gasped. You could hear it ripple through the studio. Stephen looked genuinely surprised, like he hadn't expected this kind of pushback. He said, "Carrie, come on, I think you're overreacting. I'm just trying to have a dialogue here." But Carrie was already standing up. She unclipped her microphone and placed it on the chair. She said, "A dialogue requires two people who respect each other. And right now, I don't feel respected. I feel like I'm being used to push an agenda that has nothing to do with why I agreed to come on this show." Stephen stood up too, and you could see the panic starting to set in on his face. The producers were signaling frantically from off camera. He said, "Carrie, please, let's just take a breath and talk about this. I didn't mean to upset you." Carrie looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was ice cold. She said, "The problem, Stephen, is that you don't even realize what you did wrong. You think you're being brave by asking tough questions, but really, you're just being disrespectful. There's a difference." Stephen's face flushed red, and you could see him trying to regain control of the situation. He said, "Carrie, I have nothing but respect for you. That's why I think these conversations are important. We can't just talk about the easy stuff all the time. Sometimes we have to dig deeper." Carrie shook her head slowly, and there was something almost sad in her expression now, like she was disappointed rather than just angry. She said, "Digging deeper would be asking me about the stories behind my songs, about what inspires me, about the challenges I've faced in this industry as a woman. But that's not what this is. This is you trying to get me to pick a side in whatever culture war narrative you're building, and I'm not going to play that game." The audience was frozen. No one knew whether to clap, whether to stay silent, whether this was somehow still part of the show. Stephen ran his hand through his hair, clearly flustered. He said, "I think you're mischaracterizing what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to understand your perspective." Carrie let out a short, humorless laugh. She said, "No, you're not. If you wanted to understand my perspective, you would have listened when I told you that I believe artists can contribute to the world in different ways. You would have respected that boundary. Instead, you kept pushing and pushing like my answer wasn't good enough, like I owed you something more. That's not understanding, Stephen. That's pressure." Stephen's tone shifted again, becoming more defensive. He said, "Okay, but let me ask you this. If someone came on this show and said they didn't want to talk about civil rights, or they didn't want to discuss equality because it was too political, would you defend that too? Or is this only about protecting your own comfort?" The audience audibly reacted to that, a mix of gasps and uncomfortable murmurs. Carrie's eyes widened, and for a second, it looked like she might actually walk off right then and there, without saying another word. But instead, she stepped closer to Stephen's desk, and when she spoke, her voice was shaking with controlled anger. She said, "How dare you compare my choice to keep certain aspects of my life private to someone refusing to acknowledge basic human rights? That is completely out of line, and you know it." Stephen held up his hands defensively. He said, "I'm not comparing anything. I'm asking where the line is. I'm asking when it becomes important enough to speak up." "That's a fair question," Carrie shot back. It's not a fair question when you're weaponizing it to make me look like I don't care about people. I've spent my entire career treating everyone with kindness and respect. I've donated millions to causes that help people in need. I've used my platform to lift others up. But because I won't perform my politics for your audience, you're insinuating that I'm morally deficient. Do you not see how manipulative that is? Stephen's voice rose slightly. He said, I never said you were morally deficient, Carrie. You're putting words in my mouth. All I'm saying is that in this moment, in this country, silence can send a message whether you intend it to or not. Carrie's voice rose to match his. She said, and all I'm saying is that you don't get to decide what my silence means. You don't get to tell me that the work I do behind the scenes doesn't count just because. I'm not posting about it on social media or discussing it in interviews. There are people who need help, real help, and I give it to them. But I don't need a round of applause or a pat on the back every time I do something good. That's not why I do it. The energy in the room had completely transformed. What started as a standard late-night interview had turned into something raw and real, and no one could look away. Stephen seemed to realize he was losing control of the narrative. He tried to soften his approach. He said, Look, Carrie, I think we got off on the wrong foot here. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm really not. I just think that people with platforms like yours have an opportunity to make a difference. And I'm curious about how you see that responsibility. Carrie closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, she looked directly into the camera, not at Stephen, but at the audience watching at home. She said, I want to be clear about something. I love my fans. I am grateful every single day for the life I get to live because of their support. But I am not a politician. I am not an activist. I am a singer. I am a songwriter. I am a mother. And I am a human being who is trying to navigate this world just like everyone else. I have opinions. I have beliefs. I have values. But I also have boundaries. And those boundaries are not up for negotiation just because someone thinks they know better. Stephen tried to interject. He said, Carrie, I don't think I know better. I just think that ... but Carrie cut him off. She said, yes, you do. That's exactly what this whole conversation has been about. You think that your way of engaging with the world is the right way, and anyone who doesn't do it your way is wrong. But that's not how life works, Stephen. People are complicated. Situations are nuanced. And sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is admit that you don't have all the answers, instead of pretending that you do. Stephen's face was completely red now. He said, I never claimed to have all the answers. But I do think there are certain things that we should all be able to agree on. Basic human dignity. For example, equal rights. Are those things you agree with or not? Carrie's expression hardened again. She said, Of course I agree with those things. But the fact that you even have to ask me that question shows exactly what's wrong with this conversation. You're not interested in what I actually believe. You're interested in getting me to say it in a way that fits your narrative. And when I don't comply, you imply that maybe I don't really believe in human dignity at all. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's manipulation. The audience was riveting. Some people nodding in agreement with Carrie, others looking uncomfortable, a few whispering to each other. Stephen looked out at the crowd, then back at Carrie. He said, I'm sorry you feel that way. That was never my intention. Carrie shook her head. She said, intention doesn't erase impact. You can say you didn't mean to make me feel ambushed, but I feel ambushed. You can say you didn't mean to be disrespectful, but I feel disrespected. And at a certain point, you have to take responsibility for how your actions affect other people, regardless of what you intended. Stephen's jaw clenched. He said, Okay, so what do you want me to do here, Carrie? Do you want me to apologize? Do you want me to take back the questions? I'm trying to have a real conversation with you, and you're acting like I've committed some kind of crime. Carrie's voice went quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that's more powerful than shouting. She said, I want you to recognize that not everyone has to engage with the world the way you do. I want you to understand that respect means accepting someone's boundaries, not constantly testing them to see if they'll break. And I want you to stop pretending that this was ever about having a real conversation, because it wasn't. This was about you trying to make a point, and I refuse to be your prop. Stephen opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked lost, like he genuinely didn't know what to say next. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Carrie picked up her purse from beside the chair and said, "I think we're done here." Stephen found his voice. He said, "Carrie, please, don't leave like this. We can work this out." But Carrie was already walking toward the edge of the stage. She turned back one last time and said, "Some things can't be worked out in front of an audience. Stephen, maybe that's something you should think about." Stephen took a step toward her, his hand outstretched as if he could somehow pull her back into the conversation through sheer force of will. He said, "Carrie, come on. You're really going to walk out over this? We're both adults here. We can have a difficult conversation without it ending like this." Carrie stopped at the edge of the stage but didn't turn around fully. Her back was partially to him, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the studio with perfect clarity. She said, "A difficult conversation requires mutual respect and good faith. What you've been doing for the last 10 minutes is neither of those things. You've been trying to corner me, trying to force me into saying something you can use. That's not a conversation, that's a confrontation." Stephen's frustration was becoming more visible. He said, "I'm a talk show host, Carrie. I ask questions. That's literally my job. If you can't handle being asked questions, maybe you shouldn't come on talk shows." The audience let out a collective gasp at that comment. Even some of Stephen's most loyal fans in the crowd seemed taken aback by the sharpness of his tone. Carrie slowly turned around to face him fully, and the look on her face was one of complete disbelief. She said, "You know what's interesting about that statement, Stephen? You just revealed exactly what this has been about all along. You think that because I agreed to come on your show, I gave up my right to be treated with basic courtesy? You think that because you have a microphone and a platform, you're entitled to push people until they break. That's not asking questions. That's bullying." Stephen's eyes went wide. He said, "Bullying? Are you serious right now? I asked you about your views on social responsibility. That's not bullying. That's relevant discourse. If you think that's bullying, you've lived a very sheltered life." The audience was completely divided now. Some people were shaking their heads at Stephen. Others were nodding along with him. Carrie took a few steps back, toward the center of the stage, and there was fire in her eyes. She said, "Don't you dare minimize what just happened here. You didn't ask me about social responsibility. You questioned my character. You implied that my choices make me complicit in injustice. You compared my desire for privacy to people who refuse to acknowledge human rights. And when I called you out on it, you got defensive instead of listening. If you can't see the problem with that, then this conversation is even more pointless than I thought." Stephen crossed his arms. He said, "Maybe the reason you're so defensive is because you know there's some truth to what I'm saying. Maybe you're uncomfortable because deep down, you do feel like you should be doing more." Carrie's laugh was sharp and bitter. She said, "You don't know anything about what I feel deep down. You don't know what keeps me up at night. You don't know what battles I fight privately, or what causes I support behind closed doors. You see a successful woman who won't perform her conscience for your cameras, and you assume that means she doesn't have one. That says a lot more about you than it does about me." Stephen uncrossed his arms and spread his hands wide in a gesture of exasperation. He said, "Then tell me. Tell the audience. If you're doing all this work behind the scenes, why is it such a secret? Why can't you just share it? What are you so afraid of?" Carrie's voice dropped low, and every word was measured and deliberate. She said, "I'm not afraid, Stephen. I'm protective. There's a difference. I've watched too many people get torn apart for saying the wrong thing, for not saying enough, for saying too much, for expressing an opinion that doesn't perfectly align with whatever the current acceptable position is supposed to be. I've seen careers destroyed, families threatened, lives appended because someone decided to weaponize a person's words against them. So yes, I'm careful. I'm deliberate, and I refuse to apologize for that." Stephen shook his head. He said, "But don't you see that your fear of being criticized is exactly what allows bad things to continue? If everyone stayed silent because they were worried about backlash, nothing would ever change. Progress requires courage." Carrie's eyes flashed again. She said, "Don't lecture me about courage, Stephen. You sit behind this desk every night and take shots at people from a position of safety. You have a team of writers, a network backing you up, and an audience that already agrees with you. That's not courage, that's comfort. Real courage is living your values every single day without needing validation or applause. Real courage is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Real courage is treating people with respect even when you disagree with them, which is something you've clearly forgotten how to do. The audience erupted. Some people started clapping for Carrie, others were booing. The studio descended into chaos. Stephen had to raise his voice to be heard over the noise. He said, "Oh, so now I don't have courage? I don't treat people with respect." That's rich coming from someone who won't even answer a simple question about where they stand. Carrie's voice cut through the din like a knife. She said, "I've answered your question multiple times. Stephen, you just don't like the answer. You want me to perform for you. You want me to give you a soundbite that you can use to prove whatever point you're trying to make. But I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to reduce complex personal beliefs into digestible content for your show. I'm not going to pretend that every issue has a simple answer just because it would make better television." Stephen stepped out from behind his desk now, closing the distance between them. He said, "This isn't about television, Carrie. This is about accountability. This is about people who have influence taking responsibility for that influence. You can't just enjoy all the benefits of fame and then hide when things get complicated." Carrie stood her ground, not backing away even as Stephen approached. She said, "I'm not hiding. I'm setting boundaries. And the fact that you can't tell the difference is exactly why I'm leaving. You think that anyone who doesn't operate exactly the way you think they should is somehow failing morally. You think that your way is the only way. But the world doesn't work like that, and people don't work like that. We're all trying to figure this out as we go, and we're all going to make different choices about how we navigate our public and private lives. That doesn't make anyone right or wrong, it just makes us human." Stephen's voice was rising in both volume and intensity. He said, "Some choices are wrong, Carrie. Some choices do have moral weight, and pretending otherwise is just an excuse to avoid taking a stand." Carrie's voice rose to match his. She said, "And who gets to decide which choices are wrong? Stephen. You, the Twitter mob. Whatever journalist decides to write a think piece about me next week. I'm so tired of this idea that everyone has to publicly declare their entire worldview for examination and judgment. I'm tired of the expectation that every celebrity needs to be an activist, every artist needs to be a politician, every human being needs to have a perfectly articulated position on every single issue, or else they're part of the problem. It's exhausting, it's unrealistic, and it's fundamentally unfair." Stephen threw his hands up in the air. He said, "Life isn't fair, Carrie. The world isn't fair. And people who have platforms have a responsibility to use them. I'm sorry if you find that exhausting, but that's reality." Carrie's voice went deadly calm. She said, "No, Stephen. That's your opinion? And you're so convinced that your opinion is fact that you can't even see how you're behaving right now. You invited me here as a guest. You're supposed to be a host. But instead of treating me with respect, you've spent this entire interview trying to humiliate me into submission. And when I wouldn't submit, you got angry. You got personal. You got mean. Is that really the example you want to set? Is that really the kind of discourse you want to model?" Stephen's face was flushed, his breathing heavy. He said, "I'm not trying to humiliate you. I'm trying to get you to see beyond your own privilege and understand that your silence has consequences." Carrie shook her head slowly, and there was something almost pitying in her expression now. She said, "The only thing I see clearly right now is that you're more interested in being right than in being kind. You're more interested in winning an argument than in understanding another person's perspective. And that's sad, Stephen. It really is. Because you have this incredible platform, you have this opportunity to bring people together, to foster real dialogue, to create understanding. But instead, you use it to tear people down when they don't perform the way you want them to." Stephen pointed at her, his fingers shaking slightly. He said, "I'm not tearing you down. You're running away because you can't defend your position." Carrie picked up her purse again and slung it over her shoulder. She said, "I don't need to defend my position to you or to anyone else. I know who I am. I know what I believe. I know what I've done and what I continue to do. And I don't need your approval or your validation. What I needed was respect, and you couldn't give me that. So, yes, I'm leaving. Not because I can't defend myself, but because I refuse to participate in this circus any longer." She turned and walked toward the stage exit. Stephen called after her, his voice almost desperate now. He said, "Carrie, if you walk out of here, everyone's going to think you couldn't handle the pressure. Everyone's going to think I was right. If you made it this far, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because stories like this don't come around often.